Hi everyone, Ghoulthany Spooktano here, the internet's creepiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Clipping album, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. This is the newest record from experimental hip-hop trio Clipping. Clipping, to this day, features the production and sound design of William Hudson, as well as Jonathan Snipes, and of course the rapping and the storytelling of Mr. Daveed Diggs. Now, since turning heads and turning noise rap on its head in 2013 with their mixtape Mid-City, the trio has consistently proven themselves to be one of the most creative acts in hip-hop today. Whether it's through their spectacular sub-pop debut a year later, or with the narrative concept album Splendor and Misery in 2016, a record about an escapee on an intergalactic slave ship, and the ship falls in love with him. It's complicated. Anyway, it's been a few years now since we have heard from Clipping in a studio album capacity, though it seems like each member is kept pretty busy with their own respective solo projects in film work, soundtrack work, some solo stuff too. But despite each member being split into their own lane for a little bit, they have convened onto this new record in such a way where it sounds like they just haven't missed a beat, because they come through with one of their most cohesive, focused, conceptual, and big idea records yet. Now, There Existed an Addiction to Blood isn't that far off sonically and thematically from a lot of Clipping's previous work. There is a lot of storytelling on this thing, a lot of very fast, verbose rapping. The production is noisy, vaguely industrial at points. But above all, this new album here is scary. It's frightening. It's kind of the linchpin of the record. One could potentially classify this project even as horrorcore, with its morbid infatuations, all of its blood, all of its gruesome details. So yeah, there's a lot of bodies buried on this album. It's kind of creepy, though again, for Clipping, that is not entirely new. What are tracks like Body and Blood or Break the Glass if not an attempt at inducing fear? But basically that whole fear thing on There Existed an Addiction to Blood, they push it so much further. It is the focus of the album. They are dropping this project just before Halloween, for Christ's sake. There are lyrics on this thing referencing bad horror movie plots and jump scares. Also, pretty much every instrumental on this thing feels like an overt nod to horror movie soundtracks, both new and old. Whether you're talking about the heavy and droning Club Down or the track Nothing Is Safe, whose persistent pianos and synths sound very John Carpenter inspired. Also, you have some of the interlude cuts on here, such as Haunting, which is, I think, a very old vintage tape of a woman describing herself as being haunted by Satan. Her descriptions are pretty unnerving. And then there's also Possession, which sounds like a audio clip from an old horror movie. It's very campy, a little corny, but still adds to the character of the record. So the trio's appreciation of horror as an art form, as a medium of expression, is very much on display on this project. But even though, again, I think you could effectively categorize this record as a horrorcore album, there's very little about what inspires it that seems rooted in horrorcore as a genre. There's not a whole lot here that sounds like or reminds me of old 3 6 Mafia or the Memphis scene back in the day in general, Brother Lynch Hung, or ICP, or Gravediggaz. And not that I think Clipping has anything against those artists, they probably enjoy a great deal of them, but clearly the sound and style of this album is a lot less about horrorcore as a music genre up until this point, and more about trying to embody expressions of horror, especially in film, in their own way on this record, in such a way that it leads to a unique and almost cinematic experience, which shouldn't be too surprising because when you look at the background of the trio, you have soundtrack work, you have acting, you have writing, you have sound design. There are numerous tracks on this project, just like with Splendor and Misery, where Daveed is rapping speedily over these mostly drumless instrumentals that have huge atmospheres, huge droning bass. Again, with the track Club Down, the massive hits of industrial noise on the song are huge. The song He Dead also features very little in terms of rhythm, but still, there's lots of eerie droning tones on this track, distant metallic pangs, the Ed Balloon chorus is great, and the instrumental on the show features all of these metallic glitches and distortions, occasionally bringing in some hand claps to sure up the pace of the song. Though I will say this isn't one of my favorite tracks on the record compositionally, and it's one of the few moments here that makes me wish there were maybe some more traditionally musical elements placed here and there on the record just to break things up and just add a bit more sweetness, even if it is bitter sweetness, especially on cuts where David isn't bringing the most head-bobbing flows. But still, I do love the storyline on this track, which seems like it's about a torturous murderer who's breaking bones and cutting skin and sawing off shoulders, and I guess he's subjecting other people to all of this. It's almost like a Saw in a way. But what else would you expect from an album that puts you face to face on the cover with 49 nails just pointed right at you like you're stuck in a death machine? Even more challenging, though, is the track All in Your Head, which features all of these deadpan refrains from David, wild, hurried ranting from Counterfeit Madison, thumping sparse rhythms, metallic clangs, lots of synthetic noise, but then there is this chilling, dusty, sad chord progression that introduces itself, and we get this wonderful vocal passage from Robin Hood. It feels like the sun coming up after a long, dark night of everyone just slaughtering each other in the streets. It's bright out, it's a new day, but then all the blood and all the death and all the mayhem is revealed. Not crazy about the first portion again, but I do love the singing on this portion of the track. Feels vaguely gospel inspired too. It's easily one of the most powerful moments on the entire record. The song Attunement sees David putting more of his flows over these industrial sounds. More heavy bass, more noise, more fast rap flows, which I think are great. I also love how the numerous references to burning on this track lead us effectively into the album's final cut, the 18-minute long piano burning, which sounds like a field recording of a piano burning. And that's it for 18 minutes. Still, another track with the same instrumental type as Attunement does make me wish there was a bit more sonic variety or just variance across the record. I guess the song does still add to more of this feel of the sound design of this record feeling akin to that of a modern horror movie trailer, but a bit harsher, a bit noisier, almost as if the people crafting the trailer listened to a lot of White House or Prurient or Merzbow, or maybe even some Throbbing Gristle. Thankfully, the more accessible cuts on this record, of which there are plenty, are consistently great and versatile. Again, the track Nothing Is Safe, which is essentially about a trap house, a trap spot, which ends up being under siege. Everyone thinks they're locked and loaded, they're safe, nothing's gonna happen, they're protected. That does not end up being the case though, and the Carpenter-inspired instrumental and the tense rapping and storytelling from David just keeps you on the edge of your seat. We eventually reach a point on the track where we have these panoramic layers of synths, tight trap rhythms. Also the track He Dead, which again, Ed Balloon kicks off perfectly. His singing and the melody almost reminds me of an old Young Fathers song, but overall the vibe of this track is a lot dronier, a lot creepier. David's intense rapping on this track basically flips an all too common trope in today's news: police brutality, depicting a police killing almost as if you are being chased down by monsters, by almost werewolf-like creatures who are going to kill you. The track La Mala Ordina is a somewhat weird change of pace, given that the fat, fuzzy lead synthesizers and dusty lo-fi drums sound like something off of a Black Moth Super Rainbow record. It's a little kooky. The track also features guest verses from El Camino, as well as Benny the Butcher, and if you're familiar with those two rappers, you can see why obviously David would use this as an opportunity to take a lot of themes of violence and drug dealing and do a bit of an eerie flip on that. Also, I should mention that the last minute or so of this track is really just a harsh wall of noise, and it is fucking awesome. And as long as we're talking about features on this thing, my favorite is probably La Chat's. Off the track Run For Your Life, Chat basically plays a killer. Her grimy southern flow and twang adds a refreshing dynamic to the track list. Also, I have to talk about how genius the production on this track is. All the found sounds and field recordings give you the feeling of the protagonist being outside, existing in the space that they're rapping about. Also, there's a moment where a beat swells under David's voice that he's rapping in time with, but the beat arrives by way of a car driving by, which is like one of the weirdest and most insane ideas I think I've ever heard worked into a hip-hop track, but it is, oh my god, amazing. Though this really thick bassy beat pops in when Chat's feature pops in later on the track in full, and it sounds fantastic. I love that we get this slow transition, this slow progression to this point that is so fulfilling and so gratifying. The song Blood of the Fang, I think, is really where the album's title and main theme gets explained pretty thoroughly, with David as a protagonist explaining the society, the context that he lives in, basically having this infatuation, this desire to consume violence, murder. And this also comes along, I think, with a commentary on normalization as well, because it seems almost as if at points on the song, David is trying to escape the blood, escape the murder, but then he's almost being indoctrinated into it like a cult. Love the sputtering beat on this track, the really prominent and strange esoteric vocal samples, the dusty chants in the background as well. David's flows just dart in every direction and are impeccably executed. I guess I should also mention the track Story 7, which for longtime clipping fans is another addition to the Story series. Every major clipping project so far has had a story song on it, and they usually end up being a highlight of some sort, and occasionally they even reference each other. The story on this record, though, still plays into the murderous and creepy, fantastical and ghoulish themes of the record, though, as this story is essentially about a woman who turns into a beast, I'm assuming a werewolf, because there's reference to there being a full moon on the track, and she's basically killing men that she's seducing. She runs into a character from a previous story that clipping has done, though I'm not going to spoil too much of the story beyond that. The instrumental on this one is really odd, though. The transitions are breakneck and don't even seem logical, but the more I listened to it, the more I found it to be incredibly catchy. How jittery and glitchy and occasionally harsh it is almost reminded me of moments off of Clipping's Wriggle EP, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as I think that's one of their more interesting projects. Overall, though, I think this is yet another great album from Clipping. A few tracks that I thought paled in comparison to others along the track list, sure. Maybe the final cut is a little excessive, with it being as long as it is, but I still think this project showcases a lot of great rapping, storytelling, production, and soundcraft, great theme and concept, even if it makes this album maybe one of the more niche records in Clipping's discography. But still, I see no reason not to make this record a tradition in your yearly Halloween music rotation. Though I would not call this a Halloween album, though. It just happens to be a horrifying, scary record that Clipping smartly dropped near Halloween so people would kind of be in the creepy spirit. That's just good marketing, okay? It's just good marketing. Everything else about the record, though, is good music. Even if occasionally I think Clipping does go out of their way to sacrifice some of the musical elements of this record, and even with their last record a little bit too, just so the narrative shines a bit brighter. But given how unique, intriguing, and entertaining Clipping's narratives typically are, it is a compromise I'm totally fine with. I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video for you to check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Clipping, There Existed an Addiction to Blood, Forever.